Okay, this is our Unit 7 classification unit. We are looking at page 7.1 here, so this is the first page of our notes for this unit, this new unit. Alright, so first thing we will talk about is the need for a classification system. So scientists estimate that there are about 14 million different species on Earth. Now this is sort of a middle of the road estimate. Some estimates go as high as 20 or 25 million and other estimates are as low as 7 million or something or in that neighborhood. So this is kind of a middle of the road estimate. But this, in any event, we have millions and millions of living things that biologists study as part of their profession, as part of being biologists. Now, because there are so many living things, scientists have devised a system for classifying organisms, and this is necessary. A great example of this is if you went to the library, so you go to the school library, you go to Gabeline Library, and you go in and you're looking for one particular book. Well, this would be almost impossible if the library did not have some system of classification so that you could find the specific book that you're looking for. So imagine going into the school library, trying to find a specific book, but there was no system of classification. Well, this is done in all scientific disciplines, but in biology it's particularly important field because there are so many diverse organisms, and a lot of the study is how organisms interact with each other, how they relate to each other, this sort of thing. So deriving a classification system is a fundamental need, or there's a fundamental need for this in biology, in life science. So in biology, classification involves grouping living things into categories that are based on their shared characteristics. So we take a look at the different living things and we group them together based on similar characteristics, and we separate them from each other based on characteristics that they do not have in common. So this discipline, or this activity, is called classification, which is the division of organisms into groups or classes based on specific characteristics. At least in terms of biology, this is our definition for classification. So now this is not something that has been organized for thousands of years, although we have slowly moved towards this through the development of biological science. Now, while we have had a progression to our current system, the need for classification has been recognized actually for thousands of years. The first known classification system of living things was published by the Greek philosopher. This is a famous Greek philosopher known as Aristotle. Most people have heard of him. He lived from 384 to 322 BC. So we're talking about 2400 years ago when the first known classification system was published. Now what Aristotle did was he created the terms genus and species, and these terms actually continue to be used today in our modern classification system. So he coined these two terms, created these two terms. Now, up until the 1600s, before the 1600s, so we're talking about from Aristotle, another 1600 years, or actually about 2,000 years after Aristotle, many scientists divided organisms into just two groups, and those two groups were plants and animals. And it makes sense that this is what scientists did up to this point in time because we can see plants and animals. And so we basically are looking at all the living things we know to be alive, and we divide them into these two characteristics. Around this time, though, we are developing, technologically, we're developing microscopes and are able to look at these living things under a microscope and also look at things like pond water, and we see things that are microscopic that we've never seen before and realize that our current classification system may not be complete and probably needs to be modified somewhat. So as more organisms were discovered, whether through the use of microscopes or just simple collection and observation, some of them really seem not to fit into either of these categories. They didn't seem to be either plants or animals. Okay, so now the scientist who is considered to be essentially the father of the modern classification system that we use today is a Swedish scientist by the name of Carolus Linnaeus. And so in the 1700s, Carolus Linnaeus founded the modern science subfield of biology known as taxonomy. So taxonomy is the science, it's a sub-science or subfield of biology where organisms are described, named, and classified. Now, in Linnaeus' system, he created a 7-level classification system, and it was based on shape and structure of living things. So he looked at all kinds of living things. He's famous for looking at flowers, orchids, I believe. But he looked at all living things and classified them based on their shape and their structure. Now, there were errors involved with this, but this was really the foundational classification system that our modern day classification system is still based on these. So these 7 levels that he created are still in use today, although we have added an 8th level as well. Now, in addition to our classification system that we will look at in more detail here in a few minutes, it is helpful to look at another tool that scientists use to describe or to characterize or classify living things, and that is a branching diagram. So scientists sometimes use branching diagrams to show the relatedness of different organisms, and these are based generally on similarities and differences. So over here on the right we see a branching diagram, and as we go through this we have these 4 organisms. We have a platypus, a brown bear, a lion, and a house cat. So the first thing we see all of these things have in common is that they all have hair and mammary glands, which means they have glands that produce milk so they can feed milk to their young. So the first branch off though is the platypus. And that's because the platypus lays eggs, which is very unusual for a mammal, but there are some mammals that do this. A handful of mammals do this. Most of them do not, though. So as we go to the platypi, a branch off of this branching diagram, now we have giving birth to live young, and this still includes the brown bear, the lion, and the house cat that give birth to live young. So now our next defining characteristic here is retractable claws, and bears do not have retractable claws, so our brown bear will branch off here, but cats are well known to have retractable claws, so we still have the lion and the house cat in our branch, and then we have the ability to purr. And while lions are clearly and house cats are clearly related to each other, only house cats between those two has the ability to purr, so we can separate lions from house cats in this way. So this is a simple way to separate organisms that are related to each other or similar to each other based on some of their structural similarities and differences. All right, now here on page 2 we're going to take a look at the modern system of classification, which actually has 8 classification levels. It does include the 7 levels that were created by Linnaeus, and also an 8th level we've added. The 8th level is the domain. So just some vocabulary words here. Domain is the largest grouping in the taxonomic classification system, and then right under the domain is the kingdom. So we go through these in order, from most inclusive, or the largest groups, down to the least inclusive, or the most specific groups. So, going down in order from least specific to most specific, we have domain, then we have the kingdom, then we have phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, and that's all shown in the central diagram here as well. Now, one really good learning tool for learning certain things, particularly things that occur in order that you need to remember, is creating something called a mnemonic, where you would take the first letter of whatever it is, the words you're trying to remember, and assign them some easy to remember sentence or something like that. So we have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. This is our 8 levels of classification in order, and the order is important for this list. So there's a mnemonic that I had a 7th grade student of mine actually came up with, and this is her mnemonic. Her mnemonic is do keep pots clean or filthy germs spread. So this is a good mnemonic because it actually makes sense. And you have do for domain, keep for kingdom, pots for phylum, clean for class, or for order, filthy for family, germs for genus, and spread for species. Do keep pots clean or filthy germs spread. If this works for you to help remember the order of these, then by all means use it. If you can come up with your own, maybe that's even better. Okay. Now down here, what we see is an example of animals and how animals would be separated out, looking at these 8 levels here, or actually we're starting with the second level, which is the kingdom, so there's 7 levels here. So Kingdom Animalia has all kinds of animals in it. You see anything from bugs to birds to cats to humans. We continue down, we rule out bugs, we talk about chordata, which includes animals with a backbone. Then we get to mammals, which eliminates birds. Those are organisms that have hair and mammary glands. Then we get to carnivora, which gets the people out. These are animals that are carnivores. And then we get to a family Felidae that gets rid of our bear. Now that's the cat family. Then we get to a genus Felis, which gets rid of the lion there. And then finally we get to Felis domesticus, the actual species, which is the actual individual animal right there, our house cat. All right, now, by classifying organisms, scientists are able to give them scientific names. So before Linnaeus, scientists would use very long, cumbersome scientific names that took as many as 12 words to identify an individual species, and they were very cumbersome, difficult to remember. They were not universally recognized throughout the world. And so when Linnaeus came along, he comes up with, in addition to his 7 levels of classification, he also comes up with a standardized way of naming individual organisms. So what Linnaeus did is he comes up with a 2-part name. Linnaeus simplified the naming of living things by giving each species, that is each individual type of animal or organism, doesn't have to be an animal, a 2-part scientific name. Now this system of naming is called binomial nomenclature. So nomen means name. Nomial comes from name, so basically and bi means 2, so basically this means 2-name naming system. So this is the universally recognized 2-part naming system, so all biologists essentially recognize this naming system where you use an organism's genus and species as its scientific name. So, for example, we have a famous scientific name, Tyrannosaurus rex. Tyrannosaurus here would be the genus. Rex is the species of this particular organism. There's a picture of it over here on the right. And then also a famous scientific name is Homo sapiens, and this is the genus and species for human beings, for mankind, Homo sapiens. So, binomial nomenclature has 2 basic rules that have to be followed. The genus name, when you're giving a scientific name, the genus name is always capitalized, and the species name is always lowercase. So you can see in the Tyrannosaurus rex example and the Homo sapiens example where the first word, which is the genus, is capitalized, the second word is lowercase. And also the scientific name should either be in italics or underlined. If you're writing, obviously you would underline it. If you are using type, you could italicize it or underline it. So those are your basic rules. Now, scientific names are often descriptive of the organism that they're naming. So, for example, Tyrannosaurus rex means terrible. I think it means terrible king. Or terrible lizard king, and I think that's correct. And Homo sapiens, I know this one, Homo means man, sapiens means wise. So Homo sapiens, scientific name, actually means wise man. All right, that is it for pages 7.1 and 7.2 of our Unit 7 notes on classification.